Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. When a burned-out city surveyor returns to his late father's rugged Idaho land, he seeks peace but finds a war. A powerful HOA has trespassed, built without permission, and awakened the wrong man. They thought he wouldn't fight. They forgot he knows exactly where every line is drawn. I never thought I'd end up back on my father's land, but there I was, behind the wheel of my old Chevy pickup, winding up the gravel road that snaked through the pines and led to the place I used to run barefoot as a kid. 80 acres of rough, beautiful Idaho land, half hills, half forest, with a creek that cut across the southern edge like a lazy scar. Some people inherit money. I inherited mud, timber, and rocks, and I wouldn't trade it for anything. 14 years ago, after Dad passed, I took over ownership, but life kept me in the city. Geodetic work pays well if you don't mind dealing with developers who think slope is just a fancy word for flatten it. I'd been measuring other people's land for years, but after one too many meetings with suits who wanted to pave over ridgelines, I snapped, sold my apartment, packed my gear, and drove straight to where the air smelled like dirt and pine, not exhaust and cappuccino. The land was rough. Overgrown brush had swallowed the lower meadow, and the old barn was slumped to one side like a drunk resting on one elbow. But it was mine. All of it. The deeds were in order, the boundaries surveyed and recorded in the county archives, confirmed by the same office I used to consult for. I had a plan: clean up the northern slope, rebuild the barn, and run a small but premium landscape design consultancy from my own land. No more landlords, no more bosses, just me, the dogs, and the soil. The first couple of months went by in a blur of chainsaws, wheelbarrows, and sore muscles. I cleared brush, set up solar, patched the roof, and rerouted part of the creek to run a gravity-fed irrigation system. The mornings were cold. The nights were darker than the inside of a cave, and I slept like the dead. It was quiet, peaceful, the kind of quiet that buzzes in your ears because you forgot what silence sounds like. One afternoon in early spring, I was working near the old cedar line that marked the southern boundary when I heard it. Machinery. Not the usual ranch noise either. This was construction grade, deep diesel growl, the clatter of steel buckets, that rhythmic thump of foundation drilling. I paused, wiped the sweat off my neck, and listened harder. Definitely not on my side of the property line, or so I thought. At first, I figured it was the HOA folks from Sunridge Ranch Estates, the fancy development a few hundred yards downhill. I'd seen the entrance signs on the main road, all limestone, manicured grass, and fake rustic charm. Cookie-cutter houses with mountain views and fences too clean to have ever met a cow. I knew they were nearby, but not that nearby. Still, curiosity got the better of me. I hiked down through the brush and stopped cold when I saw it. Bare soil, staked outlines, concrete forms already poured. And the kicker, the site butted right up against the cedar line. Too close. Way too close. I didn't say anything then. Just took some photos on my phone and hiked back up, unease brewing in my gut like old coffee. The next day, I called the number listed for Sunridge Ranch's HOA office. A cheerful assistant patched me through to the chairwoman, someone named Karen Jerry. The voice that answered was smooth, polite, and steeped in the type of suburban superiority that made me want to shower. "Oh yes, we're just doing a little community improvement," she said. The board approved a small retreat center for our directors. It's really more of a lodge, for planning, community events, maybe a meditation space. And don't worry, we've had everything cleared through the county. I told her I was pretty sure they were building over the property line. "Oh, I think you're mistaken," she laughed lightly. That little patch was just some abandoned land. We were told the previous owner said it was fine, completely overgrown. No one's touched it in decades. I nearly choked. That abandoned patch was my father's deer stand area. That land's been recorded under my name for 14 years. There was a pause. "Well," she said, tone changing slightly, "we were under a different impression. I'll look into it." Then she hung up. That was it. No apology, no clarification, just a placating dismissal, and a growing, gnawing suspicion in my gut. 2 days later, I hiked down again. Not only had the work continued, it had expanded. They'd cleared more trees, brought in pipes, and set up temporary site trailers. Someone had even spray-painted lines on my side of the cedar row. My land. No one had asked. No one had knocked on my door. They'd just helped themselves like it was the HOA bake sale table, and I'd left out a pie. I started sleeping worse after that. Every morning I'd wake up, grab my binoculars, and scan the tree line like I was expecting enemy movement. The sound of construction bled into my dreams, turning the quiet sanctuary I had longed for into something sour. I wasn't mad yet, not fully, but I was getting close. The kind of close where you start reading county code for fun, where you dust off your father's boundary stakes and start walking the perimeter every morning. I wasn't paranoid. I was preparing, because whatever this was, it wasn't a misunderstanding. It was an invasion. The next morning, I was up before dawn, pacing the northern ridge with a thermos of black coffee in one hand and a stack of printouts in the other. Satellite overlays, topographic maps, my father's original deed. I'd even dug out a laminated survey from 2 decades ago that still had his coffee stains on the corner. All of them confirmed the same thing. The Sunridge construction site had sprawled past the cedar barrier and onto my land. Not by inches, by hundreds of feet. I drove down to the county assessor's office that afternoon. Same building where I used to help rookies learn how to read slope grades and zoning overlays. The clerk recognized me, Ms. Halston, gray hair in a bun so tight it could deflect bullets. Ron Bates? She squinted over her glasses. Bates, I corrected with a tired smile. I need a recent parcel overlay for Lot 47 East Quadrant. I think someone's trying to pave over my father's bones. She raised an eyebrow but didn't ask questions, just printed it out. The new map had a red grid overlay, lot lines, zoning jurisdictions, utility rights-of-way. And there it was. Sunridge's project had pushed nearly half an acre past the official boundary. It wasn't just near my land, it was my land. I took a picture of the printout, thanked Halston, and headed back home. By the time I pulled into the drive, I already had a plan. Not legal action, at least not yet. I wanted to give them one chance to back off before this thing got ugly, so I called Karen Jerry again. She answered like we were old friends. Ron, hi there. I was just about to call you. Really? I asked flatly. To apologize, I hope. There was a pause. Well, to follow up, I spoke to our legal advisor, and we believe that little triangle of land is in a sort of a jurisdictional gray zone. You mean the triangle that's outlined in bold red on the parcel map with my name on it? I asked. The one where your guys bulldozed 20 trees and ran a trench through? Another pause. Ron, no one's trying to take anything from you. That area hadn't been maintained. It was overgrown. We assumed it wasn't in active use. I felt my eye twitch. Because I didn't mow the damn forest? She chuckled in that fake, cheerful HOA way. You know how these things are. So much of land use is practical. People forget lines on paper when the space looks abandoned. We were told by one of the former board members that your father didn't mind. That former board member is dead, I snapped. And even if he wasn't, he can't give you permission to build on property he didn't own. The land's been in my name since 2011. There's nothing gray about that. Let's not get confrontational, she said sweetly. I'll look into it, I promise. In the meantime, we'll continue development as scheduled. I hung up without another word. 2 days later, I went down to the site on foot. I crossed the cedar barrier and stood there in plain view of the workers. 5 guys in hard hats and reflective vests, pouring foundation mix like it was just another Wednesday. I waved. One of them, a heavy-set man in his 50s, walked over, eyeing me like I was trespassing on his lawn. Can I help you? This is my land, I said calmly. That cedar line, property boundary. You're about 400 feet over it. He didn't blink. We're working under the direction of the HOA. Permits are in the trailer. Great, I said. Then your trailer is illegally parked on private property. I suggest you tell your foreman before he finds himself on the wrong end of a civil suit. Before I could take another step, a white SUV pulled up on the gravel. Out stepped a security guard, broad-chested with mirrored sunglasses and a holstered sidearm he clearly liked too much. He stood in front of me like I was a threat. You're going to need to leave the area, sir. I'm on my own land. You're interfering with active construction. On my own land, I repeated. We have authorization. No, I said. You have an HOA permit that stops at your fence line. You're trespassing. He took a step forward. I took a step right back. Eventually, I pulled out my phone and called the county sheriff. The deputy arrived about 20 minutes later, a young guy with a crew cut and a bored expression. He looked at my documents, then at the construction site, then at the security guard. "Well," he said, scratching his neck, "permits look legit. If you're right about the property line, you'll have to prove it in court. We can't stop them without an injunction." "So someone can break into my backyard and I have to sue them to get them out?" I asked, stunned. "If they've got a piece of paper that says they can build, yeah," he said with a shrug. "This is a civil matter, not criminal. You'll want to talk to a judge." The security guy smirked. I wanted to knock his teeth into next week, but instead, I just nodded, thanked the deputy, and turned around. As I hiked back through the brush to my barn, every branch seemed to crack louder than usual. The entire forest felt smaller, like I didn't own it anymore, like someone had taken a bite out of it, and now I had to fight to get it back. I wasn't a confrontational guy, but that was the moment I realized I wasn't dealing with neighbors. I was dealing with thieves in blazers, and they were getting bolder. I didn't sleep that night. The sound of concrete mixers echoed in my skull like war drums. Around 3 in the morning, I was sitting at my kitchen table with the county zoning code open on my laptop, a legal pad covered in notes, arrows, and expletives. I'd gone from landowner to amateur paralegal in 72 hours, fueled by rage and reheated chili. The next morning, I headed straight to the county building and safety department. I wasn't interested in more polite phone calls with Karen or standoffs with security guards who thought mirrored shades were a personality. I wanted someone who could actually shut the damn thing down. The clerk at the front desk, Travis, early 20s, tragically optimistic, gave me a plastic visitor badge and led me to an inspector named Mills. Middle-aged, sun-leathered skin, a pencil behind one ear, and the deep, tired sigh of a man who'd seen far too many misunderstandings between HOAs and rural landowners. "You sure it's on your land?" he asked, flipping through the documents I handed him. "Positive. Here's the boundary survey I updated 2 weeks ago. I've got drone footage, dated GPS coordinates, and a printout from the parcel overlay database with the exact encroachment. They're 400 feet into my lot." Mills squinted at the paperwork, whistled low. "That's not a mistake. That's a land grab." "No kidding." He made a call, muttered something to another inspector, and asked me to take him on site that afternoon. I met him at the Cedar Line in my truck, and together we walked down to the construction site, where the framing crew was hammering away like nothing in the world was wrong. Mills took about 30 seconds to make up his mind. "They're way over," he said, "and I'm seeing more issues than just the boundary." He pointed at the rows of freshly cut stumps, the trench running alongside the concrete foundation, and the plastic piping poking out of the dirt like worms after rain. "Did you authorize tree removal?" "No." "Then this is strike one. County code requires a deforestation permit for anything over a quarter acre." He moved on, crouching near the utility trench. "Where's the city water connection?" "They tapped into the line that runs through my wellhead." He looked up sharply. "Your private line?" "Yep, I've got the bill to prove it." He walked to the edge of the concrete pad and kicked at a PVC elbow. "And this? Electric?" "They spliced it off the pole on my land." He stood slowly. "That's illegal." No argument here. By the time we finished, Mills had a full notepad, a camera full of photos, and a scowl deep enough to rival a canyon. He promised to file an immediate violation report and issue a stop work order pending investigation. I thanked him, went home, and finally allowed myself one cold beer and a moment of hope. It lasted all of 12 hours. The next morning, I drove past the site and nearly slammed on the brakes. Not only were the crews back, they had doubled in size. More trucks, more noise, a fresh porta-potty. Someone had even set up a portable espresso machine under a tent, like they were hosting a damn wedding. I marched down, paper in hand. A foreman I hadn't seen before met me near the site trailer. "You've been issued a stop work order," I said, shoving the document at him. He barely glanced at it. "We were told to continue. Legal says it's a zoning dispute and we're cleared under special variance." "Who the hell told you that?" "Karen Jerry, HOA chair, says the stop work doesn't apply until it's adjudicated." I felt my pulse spike. "Building code isn't optional," I snapped. "This isn't a HOA flower bed. This is felony-level trespassing and illegal utility theft. Take it up with the lawyers." I did. Back at home, I sent a flurry of emails. One to the inspector, one to the building department's compliance division, and one very carefully worded message to a local journalist I knew from years back, someone who liked stories about overreach, corruption, and backdoor politics. By noon, I got a call back from Inspector Mills. His voice was tight. "We've been told to pause enforcement until legal reviews the permit trail." What the hell does that mean? Someone upstairs, probably county council, put a hold on the violation. They say there's a discrepancy in how the property lines were recorded in the 95 amendment maps. Could be a mistake. Could be someone playing fast and loose. So they get to keep building. Technically. For now. That was the moment I realized how deep this went. This wasn't just Karen being arrogant or clueless. This was calculated, strategic. Someone somewhere had pulled strings to either confuse the record or exploit the confusion already there. And sure enough, that afternoon, the HOA issued a public notice on their website. Sunridge Ranch is proud to announce the continued development of our community retreat center, made possible through a generous understanding with local landowners and municipal partners. I nearly threw my laptop into the wood stove. Understanding? They were writing fan fiction about stealing my land. That night, I walked the cedar line again, flashlight in hand, listening to the hum of illegal generators across the property line. I counted the missing trees, stared at the muddy trench that had once been a game trail, and felt something shift inside me. They thought I'd just roll over, that I'd get tired, that I'd fold under legal jargon and bureaucratic inertia. But they'd forgotten one thing. I was a goddamn surveyor, and I knew exactly where every line was buried. By the end of that week, I'd seen enough. The bureaucracy wasn't just slow, it was compromised. Karen and her HOA weren't just overreaching, they were operating with the confidence of people who'd been told they'd get away with it. I'd played polite. I'd filed paperwork. I'd waited. Now I was done waiting. I started with the environmental angle. That creek they'd bulldozed near, it wasn't just a pretty stream, it was a classified seasonal waterway, protected under state conservation code. You can't just dump silt and run off into it and call it landscaping. I called in a favor from an old contact in Boise, a retired hydrologist named Daryl, who owed me one from a messy survey job we'd survived a decade ago. He came out in his rusty camper van, walked the banks with a water test kit and a cigarette hanging from his lips. "Jesus, Ron," he muttered, watching sediment cloud the water. "This isn't runoff. That's dry mixed concrete leaching in. It'll kill every salamander and minnow within half a mile." He wrote up a blistering report and sent it to the Idaho Department of Environmental Quality. I followed it with my own complaint, backed with photos, GPS coordinates, and time-stamped video of concrete water spilling into the stream bed. Then I turned to utilities. Remember how they'd tapped into my water line? I pulled out the maps, traced the pipeline, and found the exact point where their trench crossed it. I marked it. Then I hiked back and checked my electric meter. Sure enough, it was drawing phantom amps. They'd hard-spliced a feeder line into my grid. No permits, no inspections, just theft. I called Idaho Power and requested a technician. The guy they sent, young, eager, and about as subtle as a jackhammer, confirmed my suspicions and filed an internal incident report. "Yeah," he said, standing under the utility pole with his hands on his hips. "This is an unauthorized tap. Illegal. Could have caused an overload." I nodded. "Can you disconnect them?" He smiled. "With pleasure." He threw the breaker on their line, and just like that, the job site below went dark. I stood there and watched as a half-dozen construction workers walked out of the trailer, confused, one of them waving a flashlight like they were exploring a haunted house. Meanwhile, I reached out to a local independent arborist. The HOA had raised a strip of old-growth trees along the boundary, about 24 red cedars, at least 3 of which were protected under state forestry preservation due to age and species rarity. The arborist did a full inventory and assessment. His conclusion: they violated state tree protection laws. Easily. That gave me my 3rd report, so now I had environmental violations and stream contamination, illegal water and electrical hookups, unauthorized deforestation of protected trees, but that still wasn't enough. I needed teeth, something that would not only stop them, but scare the hell out of them. So I went back to the beginning, the boundary line. I dusted off my drone, flew it over the entire southern perimeter, and captured high-resolution topography overlays. Then I overlaid those with the original deed maps from the 1960s, the 95th Amendments, and my 2023 GPS survey. I even pulled the permit numbers from the county database, matched coordinates to building footprints, and color-coded the whole mess like I was preparing for war. And that's exactly what I was doing. I burned it all to a USB drive, labeled for attorney, and drove it into town to meet with a man named Thomas Vernon. Vernon wasn't just a lawyer, he was a predator. Ex-federal property crimes prosecutor turned private litigator, bald, lean, with sharp eyes, and a mouth that never smiled. The kind of guy who files a lawsuit before the other side even knows they've lost. He listened without interrupting as I laid it all out. When I was done, he tapped the table once with his pen. You have a clean case of encroachment, resource theft, and ecological damage. That alone is grounds for a restraining order, damages, and a full injunction. But you also have documentary evidence of knowing trespass. That's what gives us punitive leverage. Good, I said. You willing to go nuclear? He asked. I leaned forward. I'm ready to salt the earth. He nodded. Then we don't go to court first. We go to code enforcement, the press, and the state attorney general. We force them to react. We take away their ability to pretend this is a misunderstanding. I left his office with fire in my veins. The next morning, I returned to my land, not to plead, not to argue, but to reclaim. I walked right down to that half-built structure, set up my tripod, mounted a GoPro, and waited for the crew to show up. When they did, I greeted them calmly, pulled a laminated notice from my vest, and nailed it to a fence post. Notice of trespass, private property. Construction in violation of state and county code. Remove equipment or face legal action. They laughed at first. Then I climbed into the rented excavator I'd hauled in from the equipment yard down the road, and I tore the place down. First the roof trusses, then the framing, then the concrete pad. Split apart like a dry biscuit. The whole thing collapsed under the metal jaws of the cat. The workers shouted. One of them pulled out a phone. But I didn't stop. I kept going until it was nothing but rubble and dust. Every second of it was recorded. When I stepped out of the cab, breathing heavy and covered in sweat and sawdust, I walked over to the camera, looked straight into the lens, and said, "Next time you want to steal from a surveyor, bring a damn map." Then I shut it off. Let them sue me. I was just getting started. 3 days after I leveled the unauthorized retreat lodge on my land, I received a letter that might have made a lesser man vomit. Certified mail, gold HOA letterhead, delivered by a process server who looked like he'd rather be delivering subpoenas to meth labs. The letter was thick, glossy, and heavy in that smug corporate way. It was a formal lawsuit filed by Sunridge Ranch Estates HOA. They were suing me for $850,000. Claims included willful destruction of property, emotional distress inflicted upon workers, disruption of community development, loss of investment, slander against HOA officials, and my personal favorite, intentional damage to the spiritual integrity of a shared wellness structure. I laughed out loud reading that one. They'd turned their backdoor money-laundering shack into the Taj Mahal of emotional value. At the bottom, in proud embossed print, was the name of their legal representation, Marston and Claymore LLP, a notoriously vicious litigation firm known for crushing small-time landowners in property disputes. These guys weren't just lawyers, they were wolves in tailored suits. I called Vernon immediately. He was in the middle of a deposition when he picked up. "They went public?" he asked. "They went delusional," I said. "They're claiming I traumatized a construction foreman by tearing down a frame wall." There was a pause, then a chuckle. "Good, that means they're panicking." We met that evening in his office. He already had the complaint open, annotated with margin notes in blood-red ink. He was smiling the way some men smile at fireworks or high-stakes poker. "They're overreaching. Badly," he said, tapping the page. "They're trying to make you look unhinged, but this makes them look desperate." He leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. "So here's what we do. We file a countersuit." I raised an eyebrow. "How much?" $2.1 million. I nearly spat out my coffee. "That's a hell of a counter." "They invaded your land, built without permits, contaminated a protected stream, deforested regulated species, illegally tapped utilities, and then tried to gaslight you. Plus, now they've defamed you publicly in the press. The press? He turned his monitor toward me. There it was, a feature on the Sunridge HOA homepage. Dangerous individual destroys community project. Legal action underway. It even had a photo of me taken from a low angle during the excavator incident. I looked like a goddamn Bond villain. They're trying to control the narrative, Vernon said, which means we take it from them. We filed the countersuit the next day, and Vernon sent press releases to every local and regional outlet. Within 48 hours, the story flipped. Landowner defends property from HOA overreach. Sunridge HOA faces allegations of land theft, environmental damage. Engineer says they thought I wouldn't notice. They were wrong. I started getting messages, some from reporters, some from total strangers. People I'd never met telling me about their own fights with HOAs, their own stories of intimidation, lies, fines, and corruption. The HOA subreddit basically turned me into a folk hero overnight. One guy made a meme of me driving the excavator with the caption, "When your property line is drawn in concrete." Karen Jerry, on the other hand, wasn't laughing. She issued a formal statement through the HOA. "We are heartbroken by the aggression shown toward our peaceful development efforts. Mr. Bates has chosen conflict over collaboration, and we are left to pursue justice through proper legal channels." Peaceful development, my ass. Their lawyers doubled down, demanding a preliminary injunction to prevent me from interfering further. Vernon shredded them in court. The defendant did not interfere, he said to the judge. He reclaimed, "We provided the drone footage, boundary documents, GPS overlays, environmental reports, and power consumption data. Every piece of evidence painted the same picture. They had built illegally, operated without proper permits, and, worst of all, knew exactly what they were doing." Karen's team tried to argue that the misunderstanding stemmed from unclear historic boundary markers. Vernon dropped a bomb, a scanned email chain between Karen and a former board member dated 6 months prior, in which she wrote, "No one uses that patch of land. If we clean it up first, we can make the paperwork match later." The courtroom went quiet when that appeared on the screen. The judge raised an eyebrow. Karen just sat there, blinking like a deer that finally noticed the headlights were moving straight toward her. After the hearing, I walked out of the courthouse and found a camera crew waiting for me. I hadn't planned to say anything, but the microphone was in my face before I could duck. "Mr. Bates, do you have a message for the HOA?" I looked into the lens. "Yeah, stay on your own damn property." The clip made the evening news. I returned home that night to find someone had spray-painted HOA Trader on my fence. My trail cameras caught 2 teenage brats in hoodies running off laughing. I shrugged, painted over it in red, and added "and proud" underneath. The pressure was mounting. The HOA was scrambling to hold its image together, but I could feel the cracks spreading under their foundation. They'd chosen the wrong guy to mess with. The first hearing on the counterclaim was set for a Monday morning in early October. I wore the only suit I owned, dark gray, decent shoulders, no frills. Vernon showed up in one that probably cost more than my truck, and when he walked into that courtroom, it was like the temperature dropped 10 degrees. Calm, cold, calculated. Karen Jerry sat at the plaintiff's table, flanked by her high-gloss legal team like she was royalty on trial for tax evasion. She wore a pearl necklace, a stiff beige blazer, and the look of someone trying very hard to seem composed. But her foot was bouncing under the table, and even from across the room, I could see she wasn't sleeping well. The judge was an older man, sharp-eyed, with the vibe of a high school principal who'd seen every trick in the book. No nonsense, just the facts. The HOA went first, presenting their claim like a glossy brochure. Righteous community project undone by violent local madman. Their attorney, a guy named Brock Claymore, yes, really, used words like rampage and terroristic destruction. He showed photos of the destroyed frame structure, a close-up of a bent nail like it was a murder weapon, and even played muted footage of me operating the excavator. No context, no audio. They tried painting me as erratic, dangerous, unstable. One of the construction workers testified that he feared for his life as I tore down the structure. Vernon didn't even flinch. When cross-examining him, he asked one question. "Did Mr. Bates ever exit the excavator or threaten you in any way?" "Well, no." "But, thank you. No further questions. Then it was our turn. Vernon laid out the timeline like it was a war map. He started with the survey evidence, parcel overlays, deed trails, property line markers. He brought out expert witnesses, a former county assessor, the state hydrologist who confirmed the creek contamination, and the arborist who described the cedar destruction in painful botanical detail. Then came the killer sequence, a montage of drone footage stitched together with timestamps showing the progression of the illegal build, from first trench to the poured foundation to the erected frame, all clearly beyond the property line. The highlight was the GoPro footage. On the big courtroom screen, we watched me walk up, post the trespass notice, climb into the excavator, and dismantle the building piece by piece. No threats, no shouting, just calm, methodical demolition. And, crucially, the posted signs on the fence. Private land, no trespassing, no construction. Then Vernon dropped the email. It was an internal HOA communication between Karen and a former board treasurer dated 3 months before the build started. She wrote, "If we clean it up, make it usable, there's a good chance no one will notice it's technically outside the line. Once it's in use, we can claim prescriptive easement if they push back. The county doesn't cross-check anyway." The room went still. The judge slowly took off his glasses and looked directly at Karen. "Is this your email, Ms. Jerry?" Karen opened her mouth. Nothing came out. Vernon didn't stop there. He brought out a surprise witness, a former county inspector named Dennis Halver, recently retired, subpoenaed after his name appeared in the permit trail. Dennis looked tired and annoyed, but willing to talk. Under oath, he admitted he'd approved the Sunridge construction without a full site inspection. "Why?" Vernon asked. "They were fast-tracking a lot of permits at the time." "Was there any pressure from the HOA?" Dennis hesitated. "I received campaign donations from one of their board members when I ran for county clerk. I didn't connect the dots." Vernon smiled faintly, then asked to introduce evidence, a bank record showing that Karen's husband had funneled funds into Dennis's campaign via a pass tied to community beautification. The judge leaned forward. "Are you suggesting that this permit was improperly issued due to personal financial entanglements?" Vernon just nodded. "I'm not suggesting it, Your Honor. I'm showing it." Karen looked like a statue crumbling from the inside out. By the end of that day, the judge issued a preliminary ruling. The HOA's claim of damages was suspended, and the court would proceed with the countersuit as the primary action. He also referred the case to the county district attorney for review of potential fraud, misuse of public authority, and permit manipulation. Outside the courthouse, reporters were waiting again. Karen tried to rush past them, shielding her face. I stood for one quick statement. Boundaries matter. Whether it's a fence or a law, you don't get to ignore them just because you have friends in the clerk's office. Back home, I found 2 new things waiting for me. First, a written apology from the Idaho Department of Environmental Quality. They were launching an official investigation into HOA-linked environmental violations across the county. Second, an envelope with no return address. Inside was a short note, handwritten. "I used to be on the HOA board. Karen ignored every vote she didn't like. We weren't all in on it. Good luck." No name, but it told me everything I needed to know. Karen hadn't just broken the law, she'd broken her own people. And that meant it wouldn't be long before the whole rotten house of cards came down. 2 weeks after the courtroom bombshell, the headlines had changed their tone entirely. Local HOA under fraud investigation. Chairwoman accused of permit tampering. And my personal favorite, we'll fix the paperwork later. Sunridge HOA's smoking gun. Karen had gone quiet. No more press statements, no more public appearances. Her Instagram, once a gallery of wine glasses and mountain views, vanished overnight. The HOA board scrambled to save face, but it was like trying to put out a house fire with a garden hose. Half the members resigned within a week. One issued a public letter blaming leadership misconduct and unauthorized decisions made without board approval. Meanwhile, the county's district attorney opened a formal investigation. Turns out, Vernon's discovery had only scratched the surface. The passee Karen's husband used to funnel donations. It had funded more than just campaign flyers. Payments were made to a private consultant who streamlined permit approvals through friendly clerks. The county launched a review of all permits issued to Sunridge Ranch estates over the past 5 years. The rot went deep, but while the legal machinery turned, life on my land didn't pause. I was still patching up damage they'd done. The utility trench had left ruts deep enough to swallow a calf. The destroyed cedar line needed replanting, and my access road was still chewed up from months of construction vehicles. I wasn't just cleaning up a mess. I was reclaiming what had been stolen. I hired a local contractor to rebuild the road properly. Gravel base, proper drainage, reinforced shoulders. It wasn't cheap, but I wasn't taking chances again. I also installed new motion sensor cameras along the southern boundary, backed up to a cloud server this time, just in case anyone got stupid. And right at the edge of where their retreat once stood, I planted a fresh sign in solid concrete. Private land. Not for HOA use. Trespassers will be prosecuted. But the real fireworks were still coming. The court finally scheduled a full civil trial for the damages phase of my countersuit. Vernon filed a motion to request a forensic audit of the HOA's finances, and what that audit uncovered turned the case from a property dispute into a ticking bomb. HOA dues, mandatory payments from every homeowner in the Sunridge community, had been misallocated for over 3 years. Tens of thousands of dollars had gone into consulting, development planning, and member wellness retreats, all without proper invoices. One retreat turned out to be a 2-night wine tasting in Napa Valley, charged under leadership cohesion. The community went ballistic. Homeowners started showing up to public meetings demanding answers. A group of residents formed an independent oversight committee, and several filed their own civil complaints against the board. One man even stormed into a meeting with a stack of printed emails and shouted, "I didn't move here to pay for Karen's yoga wine cult." Vernon timed it perfectly. Just as the community outrage peaked, we filed a motion to add individual board members to the liability claim. No longer was it just the HOA facing the lawsuit. It was Karen Jerry and 3 other directors personally on the hook for the damages. That's when the cracks turned into a collapse. 2 board members immediately flipped. They agreed to cooperate, providing internal communications, financial spreadsheets, and even voice memos from board meetings that revealed how Karen pressured votes, ignored dissent, and mocked rural bumpkins like me. The memos were gold. One clip featured Karen saying, "He'll cave. They always do. Guys like that get tired of court and just give up." When that played in court, the judge visibly recoiled. With this mountain of evidence, Vernon made one final move. He offered a settlement, but not to avoid trial, to force accountability. The terms were brutal. Immediate dissolution of the Sunridge Ranch Estates HOA. Full financial restitution to me for land damage, resource theft, and defamation, totaling over $2 million. Transfer of ownership of the retreat parcel fully and legally to me. Formal public apology issued by Karen and the board, published in regional papers and HOA newsletters. And lastly, referral of all findings to state prosecutors for potential criminal charges. If they refused, we'd proceed to a jury trial, with everything public, including the financial audit and leaked recordings. Karen tried to bluff. Her lawyers stalled, but the board members who flipped, they weren't interested in going down with her. One of them openly accused her of falsifying meeting minutes and forging a vote. So she cracked. The settlement was signed under sealed conditions, but word got out anyway. The HOA was finished, their bank account was frozen, their legal fund drained, and the corporate charter officially revoked by the county. The properties in Sunridge Ranch Estates didn't vanish, of course. But without an HOA, they became what they should have been all along. Independent homeowners with no governing leash. The day I got the confirmation letter, I walked down to the edge of my land with a camp chair, a cigar, and a cooler full of beer. I sat there for hours, looking over the area where their illegal structure used to stand. Nothing but fresh gravel and peace. I'd held the line, and now they couldn't even find it on a map without asking my permission. 3 months after the dust settled, the land finally felt quiet again. Not the fake quiet of paused construction or legal limbo. Real soul-deep quiet, the kind that settles in your bones when you know the war is over and you're still standing. I'd taken down the last bit of temporary fencing and regraded the area where the HOA's retreat building used to sit. The trench was filled, the tree line replanted with young cedars. The creek ran clearer than it had in years. Daryl, the hydrologist, came by for a follow-up and whistled low when he saw it. "You gave this place its lungs back," he said. It wasn't just about trees or stolen inches of land. It was about reclaiming something older, something that belonged to my family, to the old boundaries my father walked, the ones he respected without needing signs or fences. Karen Jerry didn't show up to the apology publication day. The statement ran in print, black and white, clinical and cold. The former board of Sunridge Ranch Estates acknowledges errors in development practices and regrets the unlawful use of neighboring property belonging to Mr. Ronald Bates. That was all. No names, no guilt, just institutional cowardice dressed up as accountability. But I didn't need their shame. I had the land. And then came something I hadn't expected. Not a subpoena, not another fight, but an email. It was from a man named Miguel Alvarez, one of the early investors in the HOA's failed Community Development Fund, a name I remembered from Vernon's files, the one board member who'd voted no on every major motion Karen pushed through, and who'd left quietly months before the whole mess exploded. He wanted to meet. We sat down at a diner just outside town, the kind with checkered floors, burnt coffee, and the same jukebox from when I was a kid. Miguel was in his 50s, soft-spoken, sharp-eyed. He slid a folder across the table. Inside was a proposal, not for more building, not for another HOA, but for something different. A landowner legal support initiative. A startup fund to help rural property owners push back against land grabs, illegal HOA actions, and corrupt county deals. A network of surveyors, attorneys, title experts, people like me. I watched what you did, he said. It wasn't just brave, it was necessary. I didn't answer right away. I just looked at the creak of coffee in my mug and thought about the months I spent fighting something that shouldn't have existed in the first place. Then I nodded. We called it Land Back Shield. A year later, we had 5 active cases and counting. I still lived on my 80 acres, still ran my little surveying business out of the barn. But now, a couple times a month, I got calls from people across the state, someone with a fence dispute or an HOA that thought they could fine a widow into foreclosure or a family being blocked from accessing their own private road. And I helped, because now I knew the system, I knew the tricks, and I knew how to draw lines that held.